Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to the next edition of Okta's Meet the Experts webinar series. My name is Eric Kelleher, and I serve as Okta's Senior Vice President of Global Services. At Okta, that refers to the teams that are responsible for deploying our customers on our products, helping them achieve the value that they expect to out of their subscriptions with us, ensuring that they can learn the capabilities of those products and then deploy them with fast time to value to help set them up for return on investment and growth overall with Okta. In this Meet the Experts webinar series, we cover a range of topics important to identity access management, security, and to Okta's customer digital transformation in identity and security. As a housekeeping moment, at the bottom of your screen, you will see various widgets that you can interact with during the webinar. There's a resource widget where you can access resources and references for the webinar. There's a Q&A widget you can use to ask questions. We will address your questions throughout the webinar and via the chat box. And for any questions we don't get a chance to respond to live in the webinar, we will be following up via email to your questions as well. So please don't be shy. There's also a speaker bio widget, which will give you some more information about the experts you're going to hear from today. And the resources and recording for this webinar will be emailed to those of you who are attending within 2 days after the webinar completes. So with that, I want to switch to our safe harbor statement. Our safe harbor statement, this presentation and discussion will surely contain some forward-looking statements within the meaning of the safe harbor provisions of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. What that really means is we're going to talk about some things here that talk about current capabilities of Okta's products, and we're going to share some opinions and thoughts about what lies ahead in the future of identity and security. Just a quick note that if you are going to be making any investment decisions around security or in Okta, to please do so based upon only our investor-facing materials on our investor webpage, not based upon any forward-looking statements we might make during the webinar for today. For those of you who are attending, you know that Okta has been growing quickly in its mission of connecting everything and helping our customers manage identity for their employees, their partners, their customers, and vendors. As our customers modernize their infrastructures and harden their security practices, and really as they bring their businesses into the cloud. Okta has done this a lot for a lot of customers, and our experts are the folks on the ground who lead our customers to achieve the success in these milestones with their Okta subscriptions to make sure they're getting real value from those subscriptions. Our goals with this webinar series are to give you direct access to some of those experts and to their expertise and knowledge, to ask them questions regarding their views on best practices for Okta deployments, and to learn through them from the successes of the thousands of Okta customers that we've been able to deploy. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's panel of experts. Today, we're joined by Raj Nagalingam, a Senior Services Architect, Chirag Shah, our Services Architect, and Rick Zimbelman, a Senior Engagement Manager here with Okta. Raj, Chirag, and Rick each bring broad experience from their work in identity and with Okta. So panelists, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. To get things started, can I ask each of you to introduce yourself? Maybe talk about your role, how long you've worked in identity and with Okta, maybe a great customer experience that you've had here. And so Raj, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Raj Nagalingam, Senior Services Architect, part of Customer First organization. I have 15 plus years of experience in identity and access management, worked with various verticals, including finance, government, and technology companies, and have been with Okta for 2 years and 6 months. One of my favorite deployment experience was with a customer who acquired 3 companies and had 3 different identity systems. The biggest challenge we had there was having many people there talking about the design options, how we consolidate all the identities, enabling a single source of truth, enabling single sign-on for all the on-prem and cloud apps. The biggest challenge was combining all the different MFAs to Okta Verify. We did through a phased approach and deployed it successfully.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Raj. Great to have you join the panel today. Chirag, how about for you? Can you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. My name is Chirag Shah. I'm a services architect based out of on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. area. I've been in the IDM security space for over 15, 16 years now. And I've been with Okta just over a year and a half. And I'm part of their professional services division. Having been with Okta, I've already worked through numerous amount of customers, and of course, given the area I am, I've worked with a lot of government agencies as well. And one of the favorite experience I've been through is basically and just we've taking a customer pretty much from ground zero and all the way, going through the actual design and implementation of Okta and the various features of Okta set, and taking them into production live within 90 days. And then the biggest compliment was the customer was very keen and championed us by giving their experience at Octane 19 this year. So that was great to hear. And then the final compliment was they came around and brought on 2 more projects, which we are working with them right now. So all in all, a great commercial for Okta as a product, and kudos from the client. So
that's great. Thanks, Chirag. And yeah, that's always a great testament to the value customers place on your expertise, is when they come back and ask you to help them with their next phase on their journey. Which is something that I know you and your co-panelists do quite a bit here. And those experiences are really what our audience likes to hear about on these. So thanks for joining us today. That's great. Rick, how about for yourself?
Yes, first of all, thanks for inviting me today. I appreciate being here and being a part of this. My name is Rick Zimbelman. I'm a Senior Engagement Manager with Okta Global Services. I've been a identity and governance professional for about 16 years now. I've worked for many of the vendors that are out there in the marketplace, as well as a couple partners and a GSI over those years. I've been with Okta just coming up on 4 years in October, and can't wait for the next 4 years. It's been a nice ride, and I'm looking forward to the rest. One of the stories I like to tell is when I first started at Okta, I came in as an architect, and we were doing a deployment for a top 10 oil and gas company, which turned out to be a customer I had not had a good experience with at my previous employer. So needless to say, when I walked in the room, it was kind of a shock on everybody's part that I was there. The positive side is we went in and we laid out the plan and the deploy for the Okta piece, and we were done within about 90 days. We had them up and running, and it was a complete reversal of what we had been through before. So I always kind of like to use that story as a compare and contrast, if you will, to what I've been through.
Kind of good personal validation of your decision to join
Exactly.
Okta, and we're thrilled to have you. In those 4 years, I know you've worn a lot of hats here as well, and you've gained a lot of experience working with those types of customers. So that experience for customers moving from a legacy, mostly on-prem model where deployments take a really long time to the speed at which we can execute with Okta is usually a key component of why customers come to work with us in the first place. So it's great to hear experience of how you've made that happen for other customers. So thank you. Thanks for all of you for joining today. It's great to have you here. Our audience wants to hear from you, not from me. So with that, I'd like to dive right in and start with some of the questions that the audience members have submitted of things that they would like to hear about from you. So the first question we have is here: how many other companies rolling out two-factor authentication with non-phone options, i.e. security keys? And how secure is it to have 2 soft tokens, as they both belong to what you have? So kind of a lot in there for that question. Chirag, do you want to start us off on this one today?
Sure. So just like you said, there's a couple of questions in there. For the listeners, what I'd like to start first is, apart from the convention, if you asked me a few years ago, everybody was pretty much that one of the de facto standard was people used to use a lot of RSA secure ID tokens, the hard tokens, which you may have seen, and then kind of things started moving into MFA using phone and your one-time password and SMS, etc. Well, and lately there's been some new standards like fast identity, also referred to as FIDO2, universal two-factor or U2F, which have come into the market. And these basically are of course, much more secure way of enforcing MFA. They basically strengthen the two-factor authentication using specialized USB or NFC devices. That's the core concept of it. And it's, of course, much more secure than what nowadays is normal, where you're using your phone for one-time password or via SMS and so. And then it's been even stated by NIST that some of those, the SMS is bound to be hacked, given the way hackers have been able to impersonate and get the phone information switch. So whereas the MFA devices, which are based on U2F and FIDO2, they basically are based on encryption technology. They use crypto keys for handshake, and it's much more secure and not something that can be hacked away or so. So having said that, we are seeing a lot of adoptions, especially by companies where IT administrators who are dealing with maintaining the servers, backend servers, etc., Linux, Windows. We are seeing a lot of those just because it's pretty much a very sensitive topic. That's where the meat is for any company. That's where the data is, and so we are beginning to see factors like Okta Verify. Okta Verify is certified for both U2F and FIDO2. We see YubiKey and Windows Hello factors being used frequently. And if I'm not going wrong, I think Raj, you've worked with a few customers in the past, and maybe you can share some of those experience as well.
Yes, Chirag. Yes, I did work with multiple implementation, particularly on the adaptive MFA and MFA. I started, primarily I was super excited about the YubiKey or the non-form factor. I started my first project in Okta, deploying YubiKey for an enterprise customer. And also we had a very excellent deployment strategy to roll out the 2FA using a phased approach and 3 steps for success. So I did talk about this deployment strategies in Octane 2015, and a lot of customers were excited to follow the same secret sauce that we did for one of the enterprise customer. I really want to share this today with everyone. It's a very 3 simple step to deploy YubiKey for your enterprise. The first and foremost step is to obtain the YubiKey token from Yubico, which is obvious. And the step 2 is perform the enrollment process, where you register your YubiKeys with Okta. All the users will do that. And the third and final step is the enforcement part of it, where a policy will be configured. So when a user logs in, they will be asked for the credential and enabled with YubiKey. All this steps involves a lot of communication. So when it comes to an MFA or adaptive MFA, you have to make sure you're communicating to the customer, they perform the enrollment and enforcement. So we do provide the end user communication toolkit, which all our customers use it for making this a successful project.
I love it. I love, hey, we want to deploy YubiKey. How do we do it? And I love, here's a prescription. You do these 3 things, and here's the communication toolkit you need to make that happen. I think that expertise and the prescriptive guidance that you can provide based on your experience is really valuable to customers as they're assessing how they approach 2-factor and multi-factor deployments with Okta. So I love the example you just shared. Thanks, Raj, for that. So that's great. Let's move on to our next question from the audience, and that is a related topic. What does a true passwordless situation look like to Okta? So related to multi-factors, here we're a situation where the password might not be a factor. What does true multi-factor, what does true passwordless look like for Okta's customers? And Raj, maybe you can continue on and open us up on this one.
Sure, Eric. I just want to say in very simple words, it is what it sounds like. The method of authentication without the pain of having to remember passwords in that flow. A few years ago in Octane, I was talking about how we can kill passwords, and it's coming true. So the interesting part of this is that a lot of people get confused with passwordless and the delivery of passwordless. Generally speaking, in the industry, passwordless authentication platform ranges from email magic link, factor sequencing, WebAuthn, and also we have the existing concept of device trust, desktop single sign-on, which we already have many customers adopted. It is in a broad term or concept and made of many individual features. So passwordless platform, which all our customers are familiar today, is desktop single sign-on, and I also work with PepGuard. It's also kind of a passwordless. To give you a distinct example how this technology is adopted, for an example, mobile devices, you have iPhone enabled with WebAuthn, where you use your fingerprint to get into Okta or all this application. For Mac, you have Touch ID, you do your fingerprinting, it uses the WebAuthn. So if the WebAuthn is not supported, then you have an alternate passwordless solution, use your Okta Verify. So the next thing we talk about when it comes to on a passwordless is the cost benefits. When it comes to particularly on the password side, from the IT perspective, they have costs related to password reset. The IT and ops have to manage that. When you remove the password totally, you get a bigger benefit. And also, removing the password helps with all kinds of password breaches. You don't have any passwords when users are using it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that those examples that you shared and the layers of capabilities for customers to consider and how they think about different passwordless options, I think is really helpful and valuable. And as we know, passwordless has taken on a lot of momentum right now in the industry, and many of our customers, both current and future, are evaluating right now what options they should be considering. So it's great to get your perspective on how Okta can help them as they're considering passwordless options. So that's great. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question from the audience. This one is slightly different and refers back to password specific policies. So what are Okta's views for companies who are regulated by law to use passwords of a sufficient length and complexity? Do you think Okta could or does meet the requirements for such situations? So bringing us back and grounding in current password regulations and how we think about those with our customers. Great question here from the audience, so thanks for that. And Rick, why don't you open us up on this one?
Sure. Well, I think the really exciting part is we are moving forward right now with our factor sequencing for our authentication. Password is one of those factors, so it doesn't really go away. It's still available if it's required by regulation, law, or something. But you may have applications where you have to have a password, applications where you don't. So you can apply that when and where you need it. And of course, we have complexity rules for the passwords that would continue to be enforced as they are today. I think a good example of that might be that if you're on network with your company and you log into your system, you might only need to touch a YubiKey or put in an Okta Verify to get on. And then when you hit an application that is governed or is regulated, you might be asked to put your password in at that point as a second factor. If you're off network, you may have to do more than that, including the verify, maybe the password in something else to get in the application. So it's really the factor sequencing that's taking us to that next level where we can pick and choose how we authenticate to the applications, and then using our adaptive policies when and where those policies are applied and to whom.
Sounds really powerful. That's a lot of options there for customers to
Very
consider, and real value for customers to be working with folks like yourselves that have been through this with others and kind of help them chart their course. That's great. Raj, I know you have a customer you've been working with on this. Can you talk a little bit about their use case?
Thanks, Rick. This is about the customer is in a highly regulated environment that I'm going to talk about, where passwordless to be implemented to avoid issues related to password breaches. So the use case is unique in a way that employees will be using different factors when they log into apps from out of their network. When I say that, the user logging in from the Starbucks or outside the network, they will be prompted with Okta Verify or YubiKey instead of password to log in. In the same way, when the users are accessing the same app internally, they will see the desktop single sign-on where they are providing their desktop credential and they are not getting into Okta sign-in, which allows the user to seamlessly log in without the password.
That's great. So you can make things as robust as they need to be when required situationally, and when you have opportunities to make the process more seamless for users, you can do that as well. So that flexibility sounds like the best of both worlds. It's fantastic. Great. All right, well, let's move on to our next question. Our next one here is about one of our newer products here at Okta. The question is, what's the best way to roll out server RDP MFA, and what are some of the common issues you are seeing with this option? Chirag, can you help us out on this one, please?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So first off, I think the server RDP MFA component, which is recently named as the credential service provider for Windows. This is just for the listeners so that if they want to look up some information on that. And while it may show up as MFA for RDP Okta, but I think the recent name change, just so that it doesn't throw off people. There's a good amount of documentation which should really help out as well. Now, as far as the main question goes, that what's the best way to roll it out and what are some of the common issues? So the first part's easy. pretty much, this is again an Okta product feature. It's an agent-based component, and as far as the permissions, the administrator rights are set correctly, you should be able to install this fairly quickly without any hassle. Pretty much as seamless as most of the, as all of the Okta components are. So that's the easy part. Now, the common issues part, we've seen a few common issues related to when we are rolling this out, and let me walk through some of them. Number one is even in the day of automated deployments and releases, etc. It's actually the careless deployment practice that can pretty much hamper the rollout of this kind of feature, because this affect and essentially lock out the user. So what we're talking about is the user population. In essence, what you're trying to do is, hey, enable MFA for users who want to access the backend servers, whether it's Linux, Windows, etc. In this case, Windows. So the one of the first requirement is that, hey, these users need to be already enrolled with certain MFA factors. Now, this component doesn't allow inline MFA registration. What that means is, if you've never enrolled into MFA factor through Okta, or maybe your policy there was no necessity for you to be enrolled in Okta, and now suddenly you're an IT server admin, and the policy has been turned on this credential service provider. Boom, you're not able to go get in there, just because of the fact that it doesn't recognize the fact that you're not enrolled in MFA, and so that capability is not there. So that's something to take care of. What that means is you want to ensure that the user population you're about to go live with, they have already gone through some sort of MFA registration, and the factors which they have are all supported by the policy you're about to turn on for this feature set. So that's again one of the issues we've seen. Another common issue we've seen with this is the configuration is set up in such a way that when I'm logging in, it's my Okta credentials, whether I'm logging in through my AD credentials or Okta credentials, those are being used to authenticate in the backend to the local server which we're trying to protect. Well, you have to remember, the credential service provider is not here for authentication purposes, but it's more for MFA purpose, MFA enforcement. So people may say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, because Okta is of course used as an authentication mechanism. As far as this component is concerned, its prime value is about providing MFA and not authentication. So you may have a separate set of local server credentials. Those need to be mapped, and they basically are configured up front. So it's not that when it goes live, you're sitting there trying to find out those credentials. It's not like that. But so that's one common issue we've seen, that just ensure that your server credentials are actually the ones which are set up, rather than your regular login credentials. So again, it's more about planning, and then just some of these nuance points which can hamper the overall go live situation. Another aspect, which of course is communicated upfront to clients, is that based on the way the RDP, Windows RDP protocol is, it doesn't support the more advanced MFA protocols or standards like U2F. So it basically doesn't support Windows Hello factor or YubiKey factor. And so I'm not sure if that's a feature set that may come in later on in the game. But for now, that's not something which is supported. And so, yeah, those are some of the key aspects and common issues which we've come across, and hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. A lot of depth and robust capabilities and nuances for folks to consider as they explore that product and its potential applications within their environment. So thanks for sharing your perspective on that. Clearly, there's a lot of depth there for customers to explore. So that's a great way to get that conversation started. Rick, what are your thoughts on this topic as well? I know that you've got some broad experience with MFA for RDP. How do you feel about this?
Well, following up on what Chirag said, as you can hear, it can be fairly complex to put this in place. So planning and testing are critical to the success. It isn't just rolling it out and here you go. You need to plan, make sure all the dependencies are in place, make sure that you've engaged software teams to deploy these agents to the number of systems, and then follow up with testing and piloting this and being sure that it's working before you roll it out. I think a best practice from my perspective would be to have a customer start with a small number of systems and a small number of users, practice and test getting the software out, the configurations right, having those users authenticate and use the MFA and validating that it's all working along the way before rolling out to the larger general population. So I really think that just dovetails onto what Chirag was talking about.
Sound advice to build and test and roll out based on your successes and then expand that. So that's great context and perspective to share as well. Thanks, Rick. All right, let's move on to the next audience question. Next up for today, we have a different topic. What are some of the best practices and common use cases for Okta Advanced Server Access? Another product-specific question for our ASA product, Okta Advanced Server Access. Chirag, why don't we come back to you on this as another product-specific question? I know you have some experience here. Why don't you lead us off on this one?
Sure. So first off, I guess Advanced Server Access, it's pretty much a brand new product being unveiled. I think it was announced in Octane 19, and it's now ready. We have customers which are beginning to adopt this. So this product essentially was built for server security, or to strengthen server security, I would say. It's basically built to scale for protecting your critical server infrastructure, and to date, usually server protection has always been about, hey, maybe it's more about the ID rather than the actual server. Now, as far as Advanced Server Access goes, this pretty much opens up and gives a much more comprehensive coverage to the whole aspect of protecting servers by adding, again, we would be leveraging a lot of Okta features in this. But what it brings to the table is not just single-handed credential protection, but brings the whole aspect of identity access management, lifecycle management, audit, and access policies, which will be applicable now. As far as, so this, to kind of initially focus on the best practices part of the question, just this product itself, deploying this product, we've seen that places where there's a lot of servers which are based off a lot of SSH keys floating around, and environments are out of control, or in some cases it's very greenfield environments, especially when you're moving to cloud, new cloud environments or cloud infrastructure, that is, whether it's AWS, GCP, etc. This, just using ASA itself is a best practice in its own, just because of the fact that it removes those dependencies and the mess with using of SSH keys. ASA is based on this on the concept of using a formal credential mechanism, and what ultimately that means is short-lived certificate exchange that happens, or PKI keys, and basically this is a true zero trust solution. So this is not something where, if my SSH keys were stolen, somebody could try and impersonate me and then get into the server. It's not like that. These are based on the spot, one-time access, where every time I'm logging in, it's a new set of public-private key pairs which are generated, and that's how the handshake is taking place. So even if somebody got hold of my initial credential, they wouldn't be able to go far, because those things are also very limited as far as session-wise are concerned. So I know it's getting a bit technical, but that's the power of this is pretty awesome. Moving on to other best practices, given that Advanced Server Access is now, it was initially a product which Okta acquired, and now it's fully integrated with Okta. The true best practice comes when you start using is doing centralized management of users and groups of these server administrator accounts, which you need to use. So now you can just manage the whole life cycle of those users and the groups, whether, hey, these servers belong to my finance group, these servers belong to my marketing group, et cetera, et cetera. You can manage all of that through the more familiar Okta interface, which everybody is so used to, and it's seamless to operate.
Yeah, you've covered it a lot there, Shrag. So thanks for covering all of that. I think there's some really powerful applications of this technology that, as you mentioned, was what we released earlier this year in general availability, and some customers are having some great successes with getting some scale deployments in place where this solution is helping them manage their very large, complex array of servers. So thanks for taking us through that. Very, very helpful. And you covered a lot of ground in that, so thank you. Let's move on to the next topic we have from customers. This is another frequent topic of discussion in all of our customer forums. So glad to have this one come up. It's always a popular one and a valuable one. What are the best practices for implementing Okta with legacy systems? And oftentimes our customers, when they speak of legacy systems, they're referring specifically to legacy on-premise systems. But just in general, what are our thoughts on helping customers take their existing legacy infrastructure and help to modernize it, leveraging Okta? Raj, what's your take on this one in particular?
Eric, I would start with how Okta started. Okta was born in the cloud, and primarily Okta supports modern methods of authentication. We started with single sign-on, MFA, adaptive MFA. We always have challenges when getting into the legacy systems. We primarily work with the third-party vendors to enable the legacy system to integrate with our Okta identity. Primarily, when it comes to legacy system, they don't follow the standards. They are header-based or Kerberos-based authentication. So the good news is, until now, we worked with all these third-party vendors. Now we have a new product, Okta Access Gateway, which is connecting your hybrid environment on-prem solution with a legacy system, as well as it can also work with your custom-built system, connect with your Okta Identity Cloud. So I'm very happy we are going into a full circle, not only supporting the server side, we are getting into legacy system. We know it's taking a lot of enterprise to move away from legacy. We are closing that gap.
That's great. Rick, how about your thoughts on this one?
Well, I completely agree with what Raj was speaking about. I love the fact we're adding products and expanding our footprint in Okta, adding these things to our arsenal, because one of the #1 issues when you go into customers and we start to talk about implementation is, hey, great for all my cloud applications, but how are you going to handle my on-premise, my old legacy applications? And until now, we didn't really have solutions that were ours. We'd work with third parties, vendors, or custom solutions. And that was really a turnoff to customers. That meant they either had to buy additional products, licenses, or they had to pay for someone to develop custom code, then own it, maintain it, and keep it running for the long term. So it really wasn't a great story. With the Okta Access Gateway and the server access, we can now go into these on-prem situations, and we can just meld those into Okta. We can use all of the same authentication, the same identities, all of the same MFA policies, login policies, and just apply them. That's a really powerful story for the customers to be able to say, wow, I can do this all in one product now. I don't have to go buy all these separate pieces and try to cobble them together. To me, that's the future of identity. Not that the past is the custom best of breed where you've got 10 different solutions and try to make them work together. So at a high level, I think that's really the exciting part of it all.
That's great. Yeah. And for customers who are banking on Okta to help them modernize and drive their digital transformation forward, the introduction of Advanced Server Access and Okta Access Gateway are 2 new tools available to them to help realize that vision of really having Okta standardize all those workflows. That's a fantastic experience and perspective to share. So Raj and Rick, thank you for that. We look to the next audience question we have today is a related topic around legacy. So what's the best way to transition from Azure AD Sync to Okta, managing both users and groups? Who wants to lead us off on this one?
Oh, I could take this one, Eric.
Great.
I think really the transition from Azure Active Directory Sync, we're really talking about Office 365 at this point. That's the primary use case here. What we're finding with Office 365 is we have a very full-featured set of functionality in Okta where we can handle everything from the single sign-on, MFA, to lifecycle management. But it's a process, not an event to get there. You take the Office 365 is typically a customer migrating from an on-premise exchange system that they've had for years. There's a lot of dependencies. There's a lot of objects in those servers that Okta doesn't have access to. So there's a lot of careful planning to get to the lifecycle especially and be able to move that data around and manage it effectively. For most customers, the path forward is for a cloud-enabled customer that's fully into Office 365, we can give them the full feature set and move from the Azure Active Directory Sync, which they likely aren't using at that point anyway if they're fully cloud-enabled. They're more on Azure. We can take out the ADFS and apply all of the Okta features and functions to that. I would say for the older companies, the brick and mortars that have been around for years, their exchange systems could be 20 years old and have things in there that it's going to take them years to get migrated off of, and they may never. So we look at doing single sign-on, multi-factor, and license management at that level and returning them some real quick value at Okta. And the option is always there to move to the life cycle if they get to that point, but they're not forced to do that. They can maintain their business and their things without interruption.
Some really great options to think about there. Thanks, Rick. Chirag, what are your thoughts on this one?
I couldn't agree more with what Rick just said. And one of the things which we always experience when we head out to clients is like, okay, yeah, we have Office 365. Okta can provision everything into it, right? And that's how when we start doing some of these discovery sessions, and we understand, we get to know that number one, they're in a hybrid scenario, things which Rick alluded to, maybe old Exchange servers which are not at all compliant and to deal with today's modern authentication patterns. Those kind of things, it's almost like things come out of the woodwork. What seemed like the ideal picture which the customer is thinking of, and we can definitely get there, is just there are steps involved in this. And so the ideal scenario which customer is looking for is, hey, my users are in AD, or we are provisioning them into Okta. They flow in, they get they get provisioned into Office 365, and you're ready to go and fly off. Well, so pretty much what Rick said, and then add some additional points to those is like you want to make sure that number one, if you have a lot of on-prem components related to your Office infrastructure, that needs to be migrated over or moved over. We're talking things like mailboxes, Exchange servers, your calendars, objects, etc. All that which is on-prem, and you may be using part of that here. You may be using things like Microsoft AD Connect to sync your user objects and their information from on-prem onto Office 365. That needs to become a completely cloud footprint first. So that's one of the key. That's one of the key tasks involved in getting you to that ideal end state. Then other things which start coming into play is, people use or the clients tend to be using a lot of legacy clients. So let's talk Outlook 2010. I mean, we've seen a lot of those where people are still using old VB scripts to drive some of the aspects of Office 365. So while that's all good for operating in that little world, what happens is if you try to bring those to today's world, things like MFA or integration with other cloud services becomes very difficult because that's not supported. So there needs to be a plan where you need to, the clients needs to upgrade, or in some cases, basically just revamp their clients to a more latest and greatest versions of Office 365. Last not the least, I would mention that you want to remember that Office 365 is what we call as a big bang application. And so as and when the customers who are used to accessing their email systems or other components of Office 365, when the switchover happens from say, when you start authenticating via Okta and your lifecycle management also happens through Okta, there is a minor change in experience involved. However, by doing, upfront communication, Rick had alluded to using adoption toolkits and end user adoption toolkits, how-to videos, tips and guides, that definitely helps in the overall migration from, on-prem to a completely cloud solution. So hope that helps.
That's great. Really helpful, Chirag. Thanks for taking us through those scenarios and examples. We've covered a lot of ground today, so just looking at time, I think we're going to wrap it on the questions for today. But we've covered areas from passwordless, from complex password requirements, password as a single factor and a multi-factor deployment, new products including advanced server access, Okta Access Gateway. You've shared some experience talking through some legacy systems, considerations for on-prem, for hybrid environments, for Azure AD Sync, Office 365, on-prem Exchange. You've really, in this time, covered a lot of ground, which for our audience is very helpful for them as they think through how to parse your experience and pattern recognition and best practices and consider how they might apply for their environments. So I'd like to thank all of you in the panel for joining us today to share expertise. I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for submitting your questions. A reminder that if we didn't get to your particular question live during the webinar, we will be responding via email. So you'll hear from one of our panelists today with some more information regarding any questions that we didn't get to live today as well. So thanks. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording. Just one more note before we let you go for today is a shout out for an opportunity you'll have next spring to get in front with the entire Okta Expert Services organization together at our annual user conference. Our Octane conference this year is kicking off March 30th in San Francisco at Moscone West. And you'll have an opportunity at that event to meet with all of the experts from the Okta Services organization to talk in detail about their examples and use cases and best practices, and also hear about use cases and best practices from your peers at other companies that are ahead of you on your Okta journey. So please put that date in your calendars. For folks that register early, there's a super early bird rate available through the end of September. So for folks that are planning ahead for the spring, this is a great opportunity to lock in a great price for that killer event. Thank you, all of you, and we look forward to seeing you on our next edition of this webinar series. Thanks, folks. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having me.